Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. I've got Juan Verhoek here for a second interview, and he is the founder of Tender Market. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Stuart. It's great to be back.
So we talked last time a lot about AI, a lot about Europe, a lot about bureaucracy. What have you learned since then?
Whoa. So some of the interesting things is finding synergies between the pain points that we're trying to solve, how we can help clients, and being able to be flexible enough at an early stage to understand what kind of propositions and what kind of value proposition we're going to deliver to clients, and really being open to listening to a lot of pain points and coming up with creative solutions for it. So I'll give you an example. Back when we were starting with outreach, we had a lot of companies that were like, well, hey, it's great. Tender seem like a great marketplace, but we're probably too small for them. And in some point they were right, but there was one common objection we kept getting. It's like, oh, we don't have SOC 2 or we don't have ISO certificates. And at the beginning I was like, okay, you're not part of the ICP. Let's not work with you guys until you're in a bigger or until you're a bigger company. And then that's all right as part of as a pipeline. But since we kind of build this funnel that's through meta ads, for example, and it's actually people that are qualified, but they might not necessarily be at the right stage. And to reach out the people that we want to target through Google Ads, it was a lot more expensive. And we're sort of figuring out hey, what's this pipeline where if we keep seeing that this type of companies keep having these issues with certificates, one interesting workaround or loophole in Europe is you're actually able to apply to a tender as a consortium or even as a main contractor and hire a subcontractor that fulfills those requirements. So you can outsource part of your software through a partner that already has an ISO or a SOC 2 certificate, and then we just partner with a software outsourcing company to actually offer this as part of our offerings when somebody's joining. It's like, hey, actually, great that you don't have that. We actually know people and are well connected into that environment. And we let them know about this loophole, and then you're instantly building that credibility and the trust. And it's a win-win for clients and for us.
What is a tender?
Yeah, a tender is an open contract that the government, open request for a contract, where it's the reverse of the usual application, where the government posts with already a price point or an estimate, and then it's open for competition for the best bidder to actually earn that contract.
And okay, so that's interesting. So it's like an open platform, and this is with government. How does that? Is that the same way that the U.S. does it? Does Europe do it in a different way than the U.S.?
It's pretty similar. Jurisdiction and laws differ, vary country by country, even within Europe, country by country. But I'd say it works in a similar way. In the US, you have a sam.gov. It's a main website for the US government. But you also have independent websites for independent, I think each municipality or each state has its own sort of website as well, or could have its own website, not necessarily have one. In Europe, it's similar. If you go through big contracts, anything that's above a certain threshold, I think it's 50,000 euros, has to be published through TET, which is the European portal for tenders. But a lot of the smaller contracts get posted in the local sites, and a lot of companies, if you're just looking for the big contracts, you're not going to find the smaller ones.
Wait, is that EU wide, or does it depend on the country itself?
So the threshold is EU-wise, but they're often published in the national portal, even if they're under the threshold, and they have to be published in TET if they're over the threshold.
Interesting. It's just such an interesting insight into the governance of the EU and how it's different from the US as well, because the EU is like a whole bunch of sovereign nations, but all under this umbrella, which is the EU. And so it feels like a crazy Like, how did that evolve? When did the tender stuff get started?
That's a great question. Like where, and to be fair, like EU sort of publishes general guidelines and sometimes creates general jurisdictions that everyone has to fulfill. But I guess that's the usual pattern is each country tries to keep up with their sovereignty and their own national laws. But at some point, there's also international law and the European law.
Yeah, interesting. So the international law, I've been thinking a lot about international law, just related to now that I'm a resident of another country, Argentina, and I'm considering applying for citizenship as well, which I had never thought I would ever do. Like, why would I ever need another citizenship outside the United States? And then I was looking into what are the downsides, and Argentina has different regulations as it concerns trusts and like wills. And if I were to die, then basically how would everything be dispersed? And Argentina has some pretty different rules based on that. And then since I would be both a citizen of the United States and of Argentina, it would get into private international law. But what you're talking about is public, or I was about to say what you're talking about is public international law, but then it's also private public, right? Because these are private companies who can do things for the European states, basically, right?
Exactly. So you have a decent percentage, I think, around 20% of GDP is just on public purchasing.
Whoa, 20% of GDP is based on public purchasing of private companies.
The public sector, yeah.
Okay, so the public sector farms out 20%, or no, 20% of GDP to private companies, basically. Yeah, it's so interesting. And the United States has something similar with the public-private partnerships. It's a whole new world that I'm just getting into this with this episode of like the public-private partnerships. And then you guys basically help companies figure out how to apply using AI, machine learning types of situations so that they can get through the application process. It's almost like the same thing that's going on with jobs too, that it's just like the whole economy is this crazy, black box type of thing, and deals get done between public and the private. They also get done between private and private companies. And then there's the other things you were talking about the scale. So there's some that are smaller scale, then there's a higher scale. It seems like that the larger, bigger tickets are just sort of treacherous, like in terms of the companies that need to do them. And then there's all the regulation that you were talking about SOC 2 compliance and a whole bunch of other terms. And it's just so crazy. It's such an interesting world. I don't want to be involved in it at all, inside of the machine, but it's really interesting to study it and study the history. But it just also seems like hard to get my mind around. And I don't think I think everyone would have a difficult time getting their mind around the complexity of our current age and all this stuff going on. Do you feel that?
I think times are changing very, very fast. It's really hard to keep track of everything that's going on. As somebody that used to read research papers every day, now it's almost like, well, there's an advantage of like, well, I could go spin up an AI agent and have it give me a summary of things. And maybe that's what the future is going to look like. Like, is long content going to evaporate? Maybe not in relevance, but maybe in attention span. Like,
yeah, that's the hardest part I'm dealing with right now, just in my coding, in a completely different environment, and building applications with Claude Code agents every day. Is it has a bigger context window. It has a giant context window, and that context window has been giant for like a year, 2 years, basically. But that makes it harder for me to keep my context in my head. And so it feels like my brain is being stretched. Sometimes it's a fun stretching. Sometimes it's just like, what is going on? Like, this does not feel great at all. And it's all trying to get this context that the LLM can figure out, but in a way that's manageable. And it really relates to a lot of the things that I've been writing about recently, which is oh yeah, you're a perfect person to talk to about this, because you were doing a lot of the data work of the models. The models now make up so much jargon. They either make up a lot of jargon or they find jargon that programmers have made up. I'll give an example: a tuple. I learned what a tuple was, and I think you're a data engineer, so you know that it's a Python jargon. But it's like, I was like, wait, did it make this word up? This word can't exist. Tuple? Like, there's no way that this word exists. But indeed, it does exist. And like, that part is so hard to figure out with the language, because you just have to learn language to this crazy degree. Are you feeling this? What's your thought on that?
Well, like I'm from the times where if you had a programming question, you would spend maybe a good half a day trying to solve it on your own. Then you go to Stack Overflow. You'll try to see if somebody had already asked the same question. And if you were unlucky, you would have to post the question yourself and wait maybe 1, maybe 2, 3, 5 days, sometimes even months, to get an answer to the question. So in one way, like, information is so much more accessible now, and then it comes with different sort of problems. So
Huh.
I think what you were saying on times are changing. Like, we're from a generation where, like, we were raised on, like, don't quote Wikipedia. It's not a good source. And now it's almost like, oh yeah, here's this procedurally generated text that is probably correct, and people are just using it. But I think it also comes because at the time the cost of information was actually quite expensive. Like, learning
Yeah,
something, and if you're gonna
interesting.
say something, you better be right. And now, since I guess, at least in information, like, making a mistake depends on the mistake, of course, but, like, it feels like being wrong these days is actually more acceptable than in the past. I,
Yeah,
I think that's a
interesting.
trend that might happen.
It's great for me because I'm wrong all the time. So yeah, really interesting point. It was just, and it happened so quickly, and it happened like 2023, 2024, 2025. 2023, it was not okay to be wrong. We were in this sort of like, and it comes after the pandemic, where like 2020 was very much about like, everybody must follow the rules, everybody has to be right, everybody has to be strict, and then there was like a hangover from that, and now we're in this place where I've been thinking a lot about, because there's we haven't gotten rid of errors. Before, we had deterministic errors, which were bugs, and then you had human errors. Now you have a whole nother class, which is probabilistic errors, but the whole LLM itself is probabilistic. Like, that's the whole point. It makes errors. The hallucinations is the feature, not the bug. And it just makes errors that we can't hope to make because it's trying so many different combinations. But we're still getting errors. Like, that just gives us a whole bunch of new errors to work with, basically, right? Which we could get into sort of philosophical and maybe even religious type of thing as well. The word for sin in the biblical, in Greek, is harmatia, and harmatia means missing the target with a bow and an arrow. So you miss you don't hit the target. Like, that's what sin is you failed to hit the target. You got, you may have got close, maybe got far away, but you failed to miss the target. That's what sin is. Like, in my understanding, sin is just a mistake if we look at the biblical stuff. And so now we just have a whole new way of making better errors. Anything you'd like to respond there? I can ask a specific question too.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting, the background behind it. And language shapes so much of
Mm,
how people see culture and how they interact.
mm,
Um, I remember, there's on that note, like, for example, the Spanish word for bridge, we have gender language. So in Spanish, there's el puente. So when you ask the Spanish person to describe it, it'll be like, oh yeah, it's like a strong kind of structure. But if you ask a French person, where bridge in French is actually feminine, they describe it like, oh, it's an elegant structure.
huh.
And just same word, similar context, but it shapes so much behind it. It's super, super interesting.
I
But
really
I
like
think,
that. Go for it.
yeah, there are a lot of changes into this era that we're coming to. And just as you say, like, we are going to face new type of problems. We're also going to face new types of solutions. Like the other day, I just downloaded like a local LLM. I think it was like Quen, one of the Chinese providers, and it's just running locally now on my MacBook. And back in the air, I was in it playing for 3 hours, flying to Lisbon. Um, Usually, sometimes there's Wi-Fi, sometimes there's no Wi-Fi in the airplane. This airplane had no Wi-Fi at all. I just had to plug in and just play with my LLM and ask questions about philosophy, and went down a niche rabbit hole.
That's so crazy. So now the local models are running, and your experience on that local model, is it the same as like Opus 4.5 or maybe like last year's generation? And what is the how many parameters, like is it a good experience using those local models?
Well, it's a little bit slow to use for coding, so I don't really use it for coding, but
Mm-hmm.
for summarizing, finding the high level picture of many things, and just like going and teach me about this subject, teach me about
Okay.
some
Yeah.
debating ideas. It's great, and they're just gonna get better. It's hard to pinpoint exactly, like, because when you're measuring these benchmarks, like, well, okay, like if we say, like, is this comparable to Opus 4.5? Well, what exactly are we measuring?
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, I love that you're a data scientist, because this is going to get into interesting things I've been studying recently, which is I was going down the rabbit hole yesterday of supply versus demand. So you've got Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, a whole bunch of people building out giant data centers and spending billions and billions of dollars. Uh, I was prompted into this rabbit hole by somebody saying that 70% of Microsoft's AI usage is from OpenAI using Azure. So OpenAI is is like a dominant customer for Microsoft to provide all their models for everyone else. And we don't have the understanding of from those guys. All we have is Microsoft's word to say all the supply that we're building, all of that is demanded, immediately goes into production. We have no issue with demand. All we know from we can't verify that by third parties for any of the hyperscalers, like how much demand they are actually experiencing. So that's on the demand side. But then the supply side, they're just building giant amounts of supply, just expecting the usage to continue to keep on going. Now, on the supply side, we also know, because we have 3 years of evidence, and we can know. I think we can know this. It's getting more and more inefficient. Like what you were talking about, you're just going on this plane and you're asking all these questions that you would need to be connected to the internet 4 years ago, and you'd have to wade through blog posts, and all of a sudden you get that question. It's pretty good. Doesn't work for coding, and coding will continue to increase the demand, but it just feels like things are going to get more and more efficient. Do you agree with that? Do you disagree with that? What do you think about this supply versus demand for tokens?
There's so much to
Yeah,
capture
sorry.
here, because
Yeah.
for the computer scientist in me wants to go somewhere, and the
Oh, interesting.
MBA in me also wants
Yeah,
to go
interesting.
somewhere, and debate more about where, for example,
Economics.
where did I see this coming 4 years ago? If we were
Mm.
thinking, like, I was writing a thesis on seeing all these LLMs, I was like, well, what's the actual size of the market for this? Because, like, you can debate, like, well, it's going to replace 50% of knowledge work, but at the time we couldn't necessarily tell, like, is it going to get to be as good as most people do knowledge work? And it's going to replace certain things, but at the time I was thinking of it mostly as, well, I think it has a very good chance of replacing Google.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
it's
Interesting.
at the time Google was like $1 trillion company, or hundreds of $1 billion in the market cap, which made sense. Like, well, it makes sense for Google to invest all of their money into actually creating a competitor. And you were seeing like crazy acquisitions, like, oh, Google acquiring Character AI for a couple hundred millions, or different parts of the pipeline. You're thinking, like, well, what's the actual value. Like, should they pay 200, 500, 200? Like, I don't think they ever published how much it was, but it's very interesting to think like, well, how can they actually like make the decisions, or should they make the decision behind it? And at the time, everybody was telling me like, well, these acquisitions are crazy. I was like, no, it doesn't look like a bubble to me. Like, it's all just based on this, it makes sense. And now we're to the stage where like, well, there's a lot of playing catch up to do for it to actually like, I still think for replacing humans, you can't replace tasks, but people are still like working. Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
tricky. It's like, well, like, are we gonna stop having lawyers? Like, I don't think the profession as a lawyer is going to change, but what lawyers do will.
Yeah.
Maybe you're not gonna spend a lot of time just like having a team of 10 people finding and building and finding references from the past to build a good case. You're actually just like have an agent, and then lawyers can actually focus on practicing different things.
Yeah, interesting. I really like what you said about the task, because the tasks are not like, the tasks have been massively changed. And this is what gets me annoyed with the stuff coming out of Anthropic and OpenAI, which, in my opinion, they are doing regulatory capture theater, where they're publishing these cyber things. I think it's serious. I think we should take what they're doing serious, and that it's important and dangerous. But the thing they always leave out is that there's always a human operator guiding the AIs. The AIs have been tasked by probably a very intelligent, very knowledgeable, somebody in the insider group who has been seeing these things happen as they go, who is providing the go do this thing. And they never, I don't actually read them, so I'm not sure. Maybe they do mention the character and the IQ and all of the things inside of this person's mind and soul that is off sending these AIs. But it's like such a key part of it. And I find most people in that world don't leave that part out of it, which is like the human operator, the embodied observer who is guiding these LLMs. And it's such a key thing. Because if I were in that position, I imagine that I would not be able to replicate what they were doing with that cybersecurity stuff, right? Like it's outside of my ability to do it. And this is why these things are dyads, right? The LLMs are an extension of the operators' minds. They do go autonomously do things, but that autonomous always comes back to the operator. Do you agree? Do you think that that's what's going on? Have you seen the meta reinforcement learning, the idea that we're going to totally automate it? Have you ever seen that? Like, do you think that that's real?
I'm not aware of the meta reinforcement part actually. I scraped through it, but I like to go deeper into it before sharing my thoughts about it. But I do think that pattern that you're mentioning is very interesting. Like, because, for example, like, are we going to fully automate certain things? And before that, like,
Yeah.
can we actually where's the human behind this? Like, these models are not autonomous in themselves. Like, you can't just like leave them running and it's actually going to make decisions. Like, you could give it a goal and it would get close to the goal, but somebody has to prompt the prompt. Even if you have an agent prompting an agent that's prompting an agent, somebody gave that initial input. So I think on that note as well, like, it's pretty much unstoppable in a way, like regulating the market. Like, somebody's going to build a better model. That is out there. Research is out there. You can't stop like research unless you go back into the dark ages, and that's not going to happen. So it's very interesting that part. But what I do think could be done is actually, like, we see a lot of AI fear mongering, but what's our real concern is mostly like the internet these days. Like, we grew up with an open internet where you could find anything and it will be relatively easy to verify things or not. And now you're wondering, like, is this AI generated for all sorts of content, either video, audio, text? And the thing is, implementing a solution that would actually be like a pre-AI internet, it's not necessarily technologically complex. Like, maybe we'll see a future internet where you have open content, AI content, and you also have human content.
But that gets into this difficult part of identity. I've been thinking about identity a lot, digital identity, particularly because in the United States and among many other countries like England and Australia are starting to push very hard for verifiable digital ID. I think part of that is nefarious, and I want to, at least in my own world, not support that. The other part of it is that AI creates a very big challenge to know whether it's an AI or a human, right? It's the reverse Turing test. It's not like, oh, can we prove this is a human? It's like, can we disprove this is an AI? And I don't think anybody can. I know Pangram Labs does a pretty good job of doing text verification to see if it is an AI. I don't think they're as good as they say they are. I do think they are pretty good. But when it comes to identity, particularly now that we have this Wild West, the internet's always been a Wild West. And now that I've got my own servers up and running, I'm realizing how much of a Wild West the server is, right? Because I have no way of telling who are the people who are coming to my site, whether it's humans or LLMs, and no one else does either. Really interesting. If we go back 10 years ago to Facebook, Facebook used to have the Facebook auth. Google has their Google auth. Google auth works better. But still, I think a hacker, not even a hacker, just like somebody who's intelligent and curious and motivated can pretend to be a human. And I think we're going to quickly run into a world. For myself, I'm thinking like only in any sort of group that I have, like not have it be open to the open internet. I think that's maybe the only way in our individual and communities is just not have something be open to the open internet. Only allow people access or authentication who you've known personally, but then that brings the trust, right? Whether you trust them or not. Do you know about this? Have you thought about these things at all?
Well, I think what you said is interesting. Like they're also trying to push a lot of identity verification here. Like the other day, I got a prompt from Reddit, like, "Oh, get share your password, verify your age." I'm like, "Wow, Reddit."
Whoa.
It was optional, but I think it.
Wow.
It could filter certain things, and we are going to face that. Like, what do we think is the future going to be like in terms of like, do you think we'll actually get to back to a point where you get a verifiable internet of like, oh, this is actually posted by this a real person, besides like the LinkedIn badges? Like, if you go through different parts, like, what's the future of in 10 years? What's the future going to look like? Like, do you think we'll just end up in this era where like, okay, internet now is all AI slop and it's very hard to tell whether something's authentic or not? Or do you see smaller communities like you're seeing now just becoming more broad?
Let's talk about the internet that you mentioned, because you had mentioned like there's a sort of an internet, a pre-AI internet. Can you explain more? I've never heard of that before. What do you think of a pre-AI internet?
Yeah, like you can't filter right now, like the moment in time where like ChatGPT was open to the public, and you could sort of see like how does that data get trained, and like our models, because
Yeah.
you know if you get a model to say stuff and you train a different model on the same data, it's not necessarily going to get better and better and better. Like
Yeah.
there comes a point where that data is useless, and you start seeing a degrading performance. So there's a lot of value into human data and just free internet, like for those standards. And not necessarily like AI data is bad, but at some point you start seeing patterns that I thought was impossible to recognize a few years ago. And I was like, oh, this is obviously written by Claude, because I know Claude's writing style now that I've spent hundreds of hours with it. And it's like, oh, actually, this is very interesting. I would have never thought in the past it was AI generated. Now I can tell, or think I can tell fairly confidently. But I do feel kind of nostalgic about that old part of like, oh, like I get a video, I know the video is real, I get audio, I can trust this is normal phone call. It sort of gets you into, and this is just quite early still. I wonder if the war is going to go into like a paranoia stage in like 5-10 years, where because you are going to get a lot of bad actors as well that will try to use these models for bad. And eventually you're going to get a really smart person that could do a lot of damage. It's not going to be an AI, it's going to be a person or a group of people behind it.
Mm.
And how are we as a society trying to make measures to protect those that could not tell AI generator apart from like normal parts? And I guess you always have to deal with fraud. It's not a new problem. It's just that it's just super powered by new technology.
This is a very interesting point. So I really like what you said about I forget the word for it, model poisoning or something like that, where it trains on its own output and it gets worse and worse and worse. And now we don't have an internet that I wonder if we'll never have the scale of 2021 and 2022 internet. Like, I don't think we'll ever be able to get to that scale again because the internet has already been poisoned by the LLMs. Like, it's already a thing. But I guess this is what we used to both work in, was data training, right? I guess that is because they're doing it. I know.
Oh, I lost you there. We're back.
Okay. And so like we have this sort of where these data trainers are building that internet. They're trying to build that high quality data by hand. And I know from people I know who work at Mercor is starting to be very strict about not using any AI. So like no AI usage in the responses as they're getting humans to be in the loop and basically create new data on physics, biology, chemistry, all these different things. They can't use the AI anymore to help them. They have to be like go back to 2021, only with original sources, everything written by hand. And so that's what the data trainers, they're actually building that pre-human internet, but they're also doing it inside of this corporate structure that means it's not open. Really feels like the internet's is going to change pretty significantly. I wonder if you think.
If you look at the size of the data, like even if you had 1 million people labeling things, like compared to like, because RLHF is just the last stage. It's just the cherry on top of the cake.
Yeah.
Whereas like most of real data that's used to train these models, that is pretty much universal for most models out there. It's just the open internet.
So very interesting points. Can you tell? So you said RLHF for the listeners. That's reinforcement learning through human feedback. Very popular from 21 to 24, 25. I think now they do reinforcement learning through verifiable rewards, or that's the new buzzword. And I imagine both of those are in that later stage. What you just said opened up something to me, which I never realized. What are the stages before the reinforcement learning? I know there's pre-training and there's post-training. And I think what you just said is post-training. What are like for them to build the LLMs? What are those steps?
Yeah, well, I think the pre-training is where we go through and just train the original language model into open data, and then it's actually a good question. What happens between like is post-training just RLHF? My memory is not as fresh as it was in the day.
It's been a while since we worked there.
Yeah, it's a good question whether, because I always thought about RLHF as a post-training and just a pre-training as get the initial model into huge amounts of data, get it to understand the human language, but that's it. Like it's not necessarily going to learn. It's not necessarily going to have a purpose for it to be steered towards some objective. It's just going to be regurgitating the internet and give you the most statistically likely answer that comes after.
That helps me a lot. So the post training is basically where the humans guide it, and that's where both of us worked, was inside of this world and it was one of the first vendors to do this type of work, where it was like where the labs figured out that they couldn't actually all that first step that they're talking about, it would probably answer with a lot of fluency, and those types of things, but it couldn't actually get the task done, or really kind of like get at the way a human would respond without a whole bunch of humans training it with good rewards and bad rewards, to carrots and sticks, to basically get it to respond the same way that a human would. That's really interesting. And so that's the way that the models are working now. But now both of us have been out of it. We can tie this back to your company as well, if there's any sort of intersections there. But now I think that they're using a lot more tool use. I think one of the big reasons that Claude's model was so good was that they used something called interleaved tool calling, which matches the model with the tool to get the task done. And that's basically what we've been talking about this whole time, is like the task. There are these tasks out there, and like, what is the shape of the task? And like, how do you get the model and the harness to work together to complete these tasks? Now, for your company, what is it mostly been in the business side of sort of selling the power of LLMs? Are you also doing sort of data training and other things that you've traditionally done?
Yeah, I think so far for us is mostly focusing on the deliverables. That's actually something I took from Invisible. Was like I thought the way they tried to tie it, the task with the results, like there was also sort of like, what did they call it, like alignment based pay, or
Yep, I think that's it. Yep. Mm-hmm.
where, because that part is brilliant. Like, if I charge you per hour, my incentive is to be as inefficient as possible when I'm doing a task. And if you're trying to build a mode, if you're trying to build technology that's actually a lot better than anything that's out there in the market, if you try to focus on like, well, let's charge as much as possible, which, okay, that's one way to go about it, but then you do actually end up optimizing for the wrong thing. Versus like, okay, like now, like there's a tender writing pipeline. I can charge per tender application. Right now, there's a company out there with a bid manager that maybe submits 3-4 tenders per year. What if we can tie up the price of a tender to just a deliverable, and actually charge per tender writing? That's pretty much like, okay, you go through a company, we help them find the tenders, and then, hey, finding tenders, 10% of the job, 90% of the job is actually applying to the tenders and then doing the tender afterwards, and winning. And there's a lot of compliance and verifying that you have the right certificates, that you have the right resources internally. There's a lot of alignment between stakeholders. So right now, my focus is there on how can I make it as easy as possible for a company to get on board it, share the necessary information that they need with me, and actually help them prepare the first tender that could help them win 100,000, 200, 300,000 euros in one go.
That's really interesting. And that goes back to the conversation of the task, the shape of the task, because you have a whole bunch of things inside of a task. It's all very like basic if you think about it, but also hard to do in practice because there's so many moving parts. So in the task here, as you said, it's like applying for the tender, then actually completing the tender. Are you doing both of those things? Or are you only helping with the application?
Right now, only with the application. And right now, so far, we only got into that stage of finding, completed, qualifying, and actually like understanding, like, well, do you meet the minimum requirements in terms of revenue? Do you meet the certificates? Do you have the right references?
Yeah, interesting.
So that's a binary. Just no, I can apply or no. Optimizing the drafting process, like, okay, these tenders have a scoring criteria. Will help you prepare the tender so that it maximizes your chances of winning. And then so far, that's everything we're touching. Afterwards, it's the client's legal responsibility to fulfill
to actually do it. Okay, so you and maybe there's like a consulting type of opportunity there in the same way Anthropic also sort of consults with a lot of different companies. So are you doing any data stuff in that? I guess the data stuff of actually helping them apply is the data stuff. Are you finding any fun stuff to learn there?
Well, I think so far, for us, it's quite a simple pipeline where we have our we call it document vault. You can upload all sort of certificates, references, etc., information about your company. But I think RAG in the day was very exciting. It's pretty standard these days.
Okay, interesting.
And
But
I
fine
think
tuning, have you heard of Tinker? Have you heard of Mira Murati's new fine tuning API?
I haven't.
Okay.
What is she doing these days?
So Mira Murati started a new company called Thinking Machines, and they just released their first product, which is open source, or I think it's open source, might be open weights, fine tuning based off of the Chinese models. So it's only for people. It's basically like, oh, what is the good metaphor? It's kind of like a play where if you were a large company with a huge amount of GPUs, it would not make a sense to use her service. But if you're a smaller one trying to figure out different pipelines and stuff like that, and you don't want to make a huge investment into GPUs that are going to go blank in 3 years, what you do is you hire them through the API to fine tune data sets. And so when you mention RAG, it feels like the two options are either RAG or fine tuning with different types of things. And maybe that might be helpful for what you guys are trying to do for actually fine tuning. Do you know, because I think you used to work in this stuff, like the fine tuning and the RAG, and I wrote down a tweet of like, why use RAG and why use fine tuning? Do you know anything about this stuff?
Yeah. So fine tuning, think of it as like also similar to RLHF in that sense, where
Okay, interesting.
you can get your model to actually do something, and you can actually like give it data that assembles a specific area that you want it to focus on. So it will learn more about that area. It will learn the writing styles. It will learn the content, and then it's going to be able to behave better when you give it similar type of questions or documents. With RAG, it's mostly just for document retrieval. Like people wanted a way to reference the model because it used to hallucinate. And the other thing, it's when you're working with large contexts that do not fit in the usual context window, RAG is just a way to nerf that and actually say like, well, I want to focus just in this type of document. So the advantage with RAG is like you completely avoid the context size limitation, which is pretty important. If you're working with a document that's 1,000 pages long, then you do need this. But to be fair, like for the amount of actual use cases where I tell you like, well, you do need to store more than 1,000 pages to be able to accomplish this task. Like I don't actually know how many actual workflows need that much context length. I'm sure there's a few. I'm not saying it's inexistent, but it's very hype.
And that's the same thing we were just talking about of the efficiency of the models. You're on your computer for a flight to Lisbon. You use the Quen model. If you're just doing random knowledge work, which most people are doing inside of an organization, that model is great. That model doesn't need anything. It really gets into this sort of really weird, hyper specialized world that we're entering, where some use cases will become really, really inefficient. And I'm sure that's what Anthropic and OpenAI, that's where their cost basis is probably going to, is all these random things. You just brought the RAG into it. And I think you're right. I think inside of an organization of like 100,000 people at Google, there is probably some, maybe like 1,000 documents that are above 1,000 pages that they all need this specific thing to do. But for most cases, we don't need it. So that's RAG. Fine tuning. Have you ever encountered a reason why you might want to use fine tuning?
I think it's interesting. Usually fine tuning works when you want your model to learn something that it actually hasn't learned.
That's cool. That's really interesting. Okay, so to get it to learn something, man, that's really interesting.
Get it to actually find patterns in your data, or maybe if you keep asking questions to the model, it keeps getting something wrong. That's when you actually say like, hey, and we do it on a smaller scale. Like, I don't know if you've ever done like prompt engineering where like you ask a question, you ask a model, it gets it wrong, and then you give a few examples and you say like, hey, try this is how correct looks like, this is a wrong output, and then the model is actually like better.
An eval, right? That's an eval, right?
I'll just call it a problem. For me, an evil, it's when you benchmark against. Well, yeah, if you're if you're using it for benchmarking, yes, it's an evil. If you're saying like, this is what correct looks like, this is what wrong looks like, and then you benchmark, that's an evil. If you're using it just as a guider of your prompt, you know, call it prompt engineering. It's just a prompt, and you're teaching your model how to answer properly your question. Think of fine tuning as a more advanced version.
Got it. Okay.
Instead of doing a prompt, you're actually giving it 100 prompts, and you're actually training and changing the weights internally.
That's really cool. That really clears it up in my mind, basically. So it's just like a more intense engineering, prompt engineering, rather than a prompt and maybe a system prompt to kind of guide it to give you the right answer. You're trying to do a much more involved thing of being much more specific in the type of answer that you're trying to get.
Exactly.
Is that right?
You're actually changing the internal weights of the model. So
that's what fine tuning is. You change the internal weights of the model. And that's why her thing is probably open weights, right? Because it's like you need the weights to be open in order to do that.
Exactly. Okay. There you go. There you go.
Okay. That's so cool. Okay, so we got RAG, we got fine tuning, we've got this general world that we're entering into special. So let's talk about deterministic programming, because that seems to be one of the big epiphanies I've had over the past month or 2 months, is that now that I know what deterministic programming can and can't do, I have my goals that I want to do. I want to build a website, or I want to build a web system. I build it all with the probabilistic thing and have the agents do the steps over and over and over and over again. Once I've figured out the pattern of that whole thing, then I basically figure out how to convert that over and over and over again, that I built logs around and everything like that. So it knows all the flow of the data and the flow of the buttons and the flow of everything else. Then I have it standardized deterministic programming for all of that. That feels like all of that stuff means that, going back to that supply demand question, that it's just going to get more and more efficient. And that the foundational labs are going to do really important cutting edge science and business stuff and everything like that. But it'll just keep on getting eaten by this efficiency of people building deterministic software around what would take them tokens to do. Have you found that in your own programming? Do you agree? Do you disagree? What have you discovered there?
So you're asking more like, how am I orchestrating my own LLMs so that they actually accomplish the goals that I want them to accomplish? Or
yes. So basically, I imagine that you're building software. When you're building software, and this might be something purely because I'm a vibe coder who basically doesn't know how to do all of the stuff that you've been figuring out how to do for like 20 years, 10 years, is basically, so when I first sit down, I'll try to, for this, the great example. So in order to invite you to this podcast, I sent you a calendar invite. So I've now built 2 different tools for that. The first one is a booking link, which I've only built yesterday, so I didn't send it to you. That booking link, once I send it to you, then basically you would type in your email, you choose a time, you'd send us both a calendar invite. After that, then I would mint a link. And minting that link requires me to know who this person is, all the context about our interview, and this, it could be a podcast, but it could also be a business meeting, because I'm also using this software for business meetings, or it could be my internal meeting with the person who helps me publish these podcasts. So there's all these different like roles and data and all these different things. So when I first build it right now, I'm not building all of that out with deterministic processing. I'm just going to the LLM and being like, okay, I've got this interview with Juan, mint me these links, do this. This is interview me about this meeting that we're about to have. Get that all into this log. And then afterwards, after I've gone through like 5 or 10 or 20 of those, then I have this log, and then I just build out so that all of those things never take tokens again. So I'm not using tokens to kind of talk with the AI back and forth. I've now built the software, and so the tokens go away, and it's basically free. Efficiency standpoint, once that's built, is built. I guess the other issue is that, but then I'm going to go build other things, and so there's always this. So that might be where I'm wrong, where it's just like this. I'm not gonna stop with that app. So there's just gonna be more and more things. Have you experienced this at all?
Yeah, I think in software we always have one of the first coding principles I learned is don't reinvent the wheel.
Interesting. Yeah.
This was still at a time, the principle still applies today, but
Yeah.
this was at a time where building something was really, really expensive.
Yeah.
So you have to really, to be a good programmer, you really had to know what to prioritize, which applies to everything in life.
Yes.
But I think, especially now, like, as I said, like, well, you need to be making those decisions and those trade-off of like, is this worth building, or should I just use an already existing tool that's doing that will get me there? Um, a lot of the things that we're building in tender market, like sometimes I make the decision to actually go ahead and spin up a new instance, but oftentimes I just plug and play just because I rather prove that something works.
Yes.
And once I get something working, I can figure out how to deattach that and build something better. But that's usually my principle. Is like, well, if it's gonna take 10 minutes to use some piece of software, maybe pay $10 subscription for a few months, versus okay, I could build that in 2 hours, but then it's 2 hours of my time that I'm not getting back, and then it's more code to maintain. And if you have 20 different pieces of software running parallelly, it's very easy to lose track of time.
It's just so the what I was doing at the company both of us worked for, knowledge management turned from me trying to figure out how to do knowledge management at a 2,000 person company to me experiencing the same exact problem that I was inside of that larger company, but just in my own head. Only in my own head am I trying to keep track of all of the things. Like it's probably maybe 25% of what Invisible was doing. I've now got to manage just because I'm so like motivated to build all the software for all these ideas. And then and it's horrible because it leads to new ideas. And then I build new software and then I forget where that is. Let's talk about, for the last 5-10 minutes, the folder and the file system. Because the folder and the file system, I have a podcast with my dad called Stuart Squared. And so we go back through the history of the PC and how the folder and the file system were started. And the folder and the file system, Bill Gates hated it. So he wanted to build a relational database management system and replace the folder and file system, but he couldn't do it. The folder and file system was just this primitive that nobody could get away from. But now, if I were to, I would be very embarrassed to show you my folder system for the AI, because it is just going and creating new folders and new files and like new repos and everything. And it's like I don't have the things that you guys have, which is this habit of like being really diligent about folder and file system. And it kind of works. Like sometimes I run into problems, but it's just like, it's just totally unmanageable. Do you think the folder and the file system are going to survive this? And if not, what do you think will come next?
Well, I've had a huge change in heart just this last year or two about like the way we interact with interfaces. If you asked me 2 years ago, I said like, well, interfaces are going to be here for a while. And humans prefer to actually go through an interface that they understand rather than ask an LLM.
Yeah.
That was what I think in 2 years ago, back when we're still facing some paranoia, we're still facing some issues with the LLMs, some hallucinations. And then if I walk you through some of the stuff I do every day, like I have 8 or 9 MCP servers in my cloud code. Like I have an end-to-end instance. I have Supabase, so that's my database right there. I have even 1Password, so authentication credentials whenever I have to go through different things. GitHub, to have access to my recent history as well when I'm pushing code, when I'm making codes, when I deploy into production. And those are just like the ones I can tell you. Like Calendly, I even had Stripe at some point as well when I was like making payments, sending an invoice to a customer. Right now, it's very easy for me to send a custom invoice, like changing price of subscriptions, because I have a fixed rate for subscription, but sometimes I give discounts based on the client. So little things like that you would need an entire team before. Now it's very easy to say like, well, now I can actually like, to a decent exposure, I can trust the LLM to do certain things. I have it connected with my CRM as well. So whenever I finish a work call, I don't have to write the email anymore. Like usually when I'm doing a sales calls, it goes like, "Oh, that sounds great. Can you send me a summary and a quote at the end of the sales call?" And those are wildly personal and wildly different depending, because the quote might change a bit, but what's not going to change is how you customize it for clients. You have different pain points, different questions that might happen. And since there's still a bit of a consulting component to it all, this whole thing that used to take me like, oh, if I want to send a good email, I'm going to spend like an hour writing it. Now it's like, well, 5 minutes, read them better than I could, just straight to the point. And then I can just steer it and be like, hey, change this. I don't like this. And just actually after that, I just say like, I just read it and say like, this sounds too much like Claude. Let me like give it a go at my own stuff and actually like make it personal. And that's just my flow right now, which, like saves me maybe 10 minutes, maybe 40, 30 minutes at a time, but it feels really good and it pinpoints things that I couldn't have done before. So there is a lot of advantage about having this whole pipeline and flow recording. Like there's so much information, as you're saying, like it's a very interesting thing to manage today. How we think about information, how we think about tools, how we think about this part. So do I feel that the file and folder are going to change? Like, Apple created the concept of like the App Store and apps and things. So like you go through and you have an app for something. Not that you didn't have like applications before, but the experience did feel different. We still have that on Mac in some way. Like, okay, you still have a file, you still have folder and files. At the end of the day, that's just the way we currently organize our information. I think there's room to innovate and change things. Like, what do people want in some sort of ways? Like, if I look at my camera folder, I probably have like 50,000 photos from the last 20 years. Like, how often do I go back and look at all of them? Like, there's just not enough time to go through them all. And right now, like, there's a way to classify like automatically like faces or something, or like people come with creative workarounds to find solutions for it. But at some sort of way, like it's still like, would that be a different folder? Like just because I can find the information easier, like it still needs to go through and select like, oh, show me this person, show me this photo. Like right now, I could imagine an interface where like, hey, find the photo from when I was with Stuart at Invisible in 2023, and it might be able to find it. I should be like, oh, here's Stuart. I don't need to actually go through a file or folders that says Stuart and actually see like, oh, this is actually Invisible 2023. I'm like, go through it. Like I think that's possible today. So that there is some sort of like changing interfaces, but it's very tricky to nail that experience down consistently for it to become part of your day-to-day life.
Interesting. Yeah, I think what might end up happening is that the PC itself might shift and evolve. So the PC, if the LLM could get embedded at the deepest layers of the computer, but that also might be a giant security risk. So that might be totally nuts. But well, thank you so much for coming on the show, and everybody go check out Tender Market. What's your website?
Yeah, tendermarket.eu.